Benvinguts. Duim un nou món en els nostres cors. Aquesta nova educació, aquesta educació que volem millorar, se centra en la vida. Cada un la pot anomenar de diferent manera. Educació integral, educació viva. Nosaltres l'anomenem educació holística. Aquesta educació que se centra en la vida activa el nivell més elevat del cos que pensa, que és la saviesa, i el nivell més elevat del cos que sent, que és la consciència. I els du a l'acció a nivell personal, a nivell social i a nivell cultural. Interconnecta i uneix a tota la comunitat a dins una atmosfera d'esperit lliure i de reverència per la vida. Per la vida de tothom, de tots els ser vius, incloent els animals, els arbres, les plantes, els boscos, la mar. El moviment de drets humans i que volia aturar i que va aturar el racisme d'en Martin Luther King estava basat en l'amor. I el moviment d'ajuda en els més necessitats de la Mare Teresa també està basat en l'amor. I el moviment de no violència d'en Gandhi també està basat en l'amor. El moviment del Dalai Lama de reconciliació també està basat en l'amor. I el moviment d'en Patch Adams també està basat en l'amor. I el moviment d'en David Orr també està basat en l'amor. I el moviment social, ecològic, espiritual d'en Satish Kumar també està basat en l'amor. I aquesta educació que ja s'està fent, que és viva, no és una utopia, és una cosa que ja s'està produint dia a dia, amb professors, amb escoles. Aquí, a Mallorca, també està basat en l'amor. I és un amor que no exclou a ningú. No exclou a ningú. Hi ha un fil que ens uneix a tots. I és un fil invisible. I lo invisible ens costa entendre-ho. Lo invisible ha desaparegut de les famílies i de les escoles. I jo vull fer ara mateix visible lo invisible. Això és el fil que ens uneix a tots, és el fil de l'amor. Ens agradaria que a totes les escoles, a totes les famílies de Mallorca, comencem a fer visible lo invisible. Gràcies, Techo. I amb aquest esperit d'unió, amb aquest esperit d'interconnectar, perquè vivim a dins un univers que és un tot, amb aquesta atmosfera d'esperit lliure que està present aquí, avui, a dins tot nosaltres, tenc que dir que el més important que passarà avui no serà en aquest escenari ni allà de fora, sinó serà a dins el cor de cada un de vosaltres. I amb aquest esperit d'unitat, si vos fa ganes, m'agradaria que vos aixecàssiu drets i donant la benvinguda a aquestes persones extraordinàries que en la seva experiència i en les seves pràctiques compartiran aquests 2 dies, sobretot d'amor. En David Orr, en Patch Adams i en Satish Kumar. Yes. I Carlos González.
Thank you. Wonderful audience.
So now he stays for meditation.
Thank you, Guillaume. You are going to listen many beautiful words. But before we start this very active day, let us start a short period of meditation. Meditation and medicine, these 2 words come from the same root. And our Dr. Patch Adams is expert on both medicine and meditation. Medicine for your body and meditation for your soul. So please put your both feet on the floor firmly and put your both hands on your knees. Palms up and relaxed. And close your eyes and make a circle with the index finger and the thumb. Everything is connected as the index finger and thumb are connected. And everything is moving in cycles as the cycle made with index finger and the thumb represent. The cycle of time, the cycle of life. The 3 remaining fingers stay straight, representing the past, the present, and the future simultaneously. And also many wonderful trinities. The Indian trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. Beginning, continuation, and dissolution. Truth, goodness, and beauty. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Mind, body, and spirit. Soil, soul, and society. All great trinities are represented with these fingers, 3 fingers. And the mandala made with index finger, and the thumb represents the sun, the moon, the earth, and ourselves. To meditate is to pay attention to your mind, to your body, to your spirit, and to be aware of the state of your mind, your body, and your spirit. We pay attention to our body posture and we relax. We relax our shoulders. We relax our arms. We relax our legs. We relax our whole body. We relax our eyes and cheeks and lips. In this relaxed body and still body, there are two movements, one of the mind and the other of the breath. So we put our mind to our breath and breathe mindfully, being aware of each step of our breath. Breathing in, we quietly say, I'm breathing in. And breathing out, we quietly say, I'm breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. And as you breathe in, follow the journey of the breath within your inner landscape. The inner landscape is as vast as the outer landscape. And breathing out, follow the journey of the breath, reaching throughout the universe. Be aware that all living beings upon this earth and in the universe are sustained by the same breath of life which we breathe. Thus, we are all connected. We are all related. With that sense of unity of all life, we breathe mindfully, being aware of each step of our breath. Breathing in, we are aware of the beginning, the middle, and the end of the in-breath. And then we are aware of the turning point from the in-breath to the out-breath. And then we are aware of the beginning, the middle, and the end of the out-breath. And then we are aware of the turning point from the out-breath to in-breath. This is cyclical breathing, mindful breathing. And when we breathe in, we breathe love. And we breathe out love. The invisible string which connects us all. We are all related. We are all connected through our breath. We are all sharing in the same breath of life, which sustains all living beings upon this earth. The mantra Om is the mantra of wholeness, completeness, relatedness, and of love. So let us sing the mantra 3 times together. Breathe in. Lead me from death to life, from falsehood to truth. Lead me from despair to hope, from fear to trust. Lead me from hate to love, from war to peace. Let peace fill our heart, our world, our universe. Peace, peace, peace. May all beings upon this earth, humans and other than humans, live in peace, find fulfillment and self-realization. And may we seek truth, love, compassion, unity, beauty, and generosity in our lives. And may we offer all our thoughts, all our words, and all our actions for the well-being of all, for the well-being of all, for the well-being of all. And may we think our thoughts, speak our words, and perform our actions throughout the day with mindfulness and awareness. Then there is no distinction between meditation and living. Meditation, a way of life, a way of mindful living. To conclude this short meditation, we bring our both palms together and we bow to the sacred universe, the sacred earth, the sacred life, in gratitude for all the gifts of life that we receive every day. And we hold our palms together as a symbol that all opposites complement and make whole, left and right, above and below, masculine and feminine, dark and light, negative and positive, all opposites complement and make whole. With that sense of wholeness, completeness, and relatedness, and that sense of love, which make everything whole, complete, we conclude this short meditation. Thank you.
Okay. El nostre pròxim convidat, no m'atreveix a dir qui és. El que sí sé és que és una bona persona. Anem a donar la benvinguda a en Patch Adams.
Thank you, Satish. Now I'm relaxed, and my friends are here. So, this morning and this, I don't know exactly if I should just be quiet for a moment.
Love and peace.
No sería tan inmensa mi tristeza como aquella de quedarme sin tu amor. Me importas tú y tú y tú, solamente tú y tú y tú.
And you. And the feel invisible.
Y nadie más que tú. Y nadie más que tú.
Abuelo,
un beso.
Love.
Thank you
the more important.
por existir, gracias.
Yes.
thank my mother.
And your father.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Today en esta semana is the 20 aniversario de Sonrisa Médica, and with you, el grandfather. Un aplaudiment per al Patxada.
Thank you.
And now speak.
Very much.
Speak.
Es diu speak English.
Clowns, payasos. I will do a workshop where 2 hours this morning and an hour and a half or something this afternoon. This morning it is exercises. The title of the workshop is, What is Your love strategy. And so the easiest thing to do is for you to leave your things here and come outside with me. And bring your freedom. So we will now go outside. You don't need to bring anything.
Bueno, ja començam. Gràcies. El nostre convidat d'ara és en David Orr. Feia molt d'anys que anaven darrere ell. Ell, si vos dic una paraula, segurament vos connectareu amb ell, no? Que és ecoliteracy. Ell és el pare d'ecoliteracy. És qui comença i llavors en Fritjof Capra s'ajunta amb ell i crea el Ecoliteracy Center allà a Califòrnia. Ell viu juntament amb la seva dona i els seus fills, en Elaine, pràcticament a dins la Universitat d'Oberlin, una universitat alternativa, la més prestigiosa que hi ha dins dels Estats Units. I allà dins, entre altres coses, a part de formar alumnes, el que fa és crear equips de feina per millorar l'hàbitat de les escoles, per crear edificis que siguin un exemple. I, de fet, l'escola que ha creat a dins d'aquesta universitat és un exemple a tot el món, no només als Estats Units, com a edifici sostenible i edifici que funciona amb energia alternativa. És un edifici extraordinari que vos recomano que el vegeu a dins la pàgina d'oberlincollege.org. També en David ha estat un dels iniciadors per compartir amb tothom el tema del canvi climàtic. Ha estat un dels primers que ha escrit un llibre sobre el canvi climàtic. És un gran expert, inclús assessorant el govern, i jo crec que també ens parlarà un poc d'aquest tema. I llavors ell ha escrit 7 llibres, estan tots en anglès, però jo espero que d'aquí un parell d'anys estiguin tots en espanyol. Si fos en català ja seria extraordinari. I diré el mateix que, per acabar, diré el mateix que amb en Patch Adams, que ell i la seva dona són dues bellíssimes persones i per nosaltres és hora de convidar la gent, això és el més important, que siguin bones persones. Welcome, David.
Hey. Thanks, William.
Thank you.
William, thank you. I feel guilty bringing all of you out from the sunshine out there into here. But here you are. And I want to say thanks to William for the hospitality. It's an honor to be with my old friend Satish Kumar and to be with all of you and share the energy here that is so extraordinary. There are great things happening here. And I want to describe a little bit of what we're doing in the States and what I'm doing. We need radical change, and the radical change is, in Satish's words, based on radical love and radical hope. But I want to make a distinction. I want to make a distinction between what Bill McLarney, an aquaculturist, friend of Satish and mine, said once, that there's a difference between theoretical love and applied love. And so I want to talk about applied love. You've got the theory. We need lots of it, but then the question is love for whom, to whom, and how is it expressed? And the fact is, and I'll get to this at the end of the talk, the fact is that humankind, all of us, all over the planet, are in big trouble. You can't run the numbers forward another 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 years and be very happy about the human future. So the kind of love I want to describe is love that goes out to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. It's love that casts a long tie to the future, to all children. And then it's also the kind of love that spills across our little human boundaries. We're only one of maybe 10 million species on the earth. And we have to learn to stretch love or some kind of affection, at least competence, to all those other species on the planet. And so love is a big concept. And it isn't just hugging each other, it is going past that to this applied love. It's what do we do if we love? And if we love large enough? And how does that spill across the boundaries? So I want to describe all right, now I'm pushing the green button. Have I got the next slide? Slide? Okay, I want to go back. This is the outline of my talk, and so I'll try to keep this in that order. And I have a few things to say at the very beginning. This is a quote from Karl Heinrich Robert, a cancer doctor from Norway. And Karl Heinrich Robert put it as well as we could think. We face a systems crisis, and so love has to be seen, whatever it is, if it's radical love, it has to be seen in a system context. It's got to connect things. So connecting is one of the big challenges in education. So if somebody asks me, what is environmental education? Well, I'll say very quickly, it is to see the world as systems and patterns. And Satish described that this morning as all the connections that embed us in the world. We're all interdependent. There's no one of us that is independent. And so to see this, to see radical love applied in the world, is to begin to see the world as a system. And then the second thing is see that as a system over time. We've got to extend our horizons. And the industrial world that we've been shaped by has been a world that is mostly short horizons. We think in terms of a few weeks or a few months or a quarter of a year or a year or two, and that's about it. Another thought. I was watching a child on the olive tree out in the garden right out past that door. And the child had all kind of curiosity and excitement and wonder. And we've got to recover that sense of excitement and wonder. And so one of the things that challenges teachers of all kinds is how do you keep the child, that inner child, alive and curious and happy and joyful as the person evolves into adulthood and then on beyond. This, however, is a cartoonist view of what we do in education. You recognize schools? This was kind of how I was educated. And you had a box called chemistry, and one called sociology, and one called history, and one called physics. And each of those boxes was a closed box. Hermetically sealed may not translate, but it means totally sealed. And so you could be a teacher in one of those boxes and know things or believe things that somebody in another box knew was totally untrue. Think of economists that believe that the world can grow forever. And then in the physics department, they know that an economy that grows forever violates the most basic physical laws that we know, the laws of entropy. And so, but economists can win the Nobel Prize in economics not believing in the most basic laws of the physical universe. You get the point. So hermetically sealed boxes in education. And then we've been shaped to a greater extent than maybe we know. Students are in your classes for, 5 hours or 6 hours a day. But if they're typical in the States, they'll spend another 5 or 6 hours on television. And maybe in total 9 hours in front of some kind of screen, a computer or television or a smartphone. And so they've been shaped by forces that we don't fully understand. And so they come to your class, and you've got maybe a couple hours to undo the damage that was done by television and by the commercial culture. The man on the screen behind me is Edward Bernays. How many of you have ever heard of Edward Bernays? Let me see your hands. So I got one here, one here. Well, my wife has heard this many times. She has to say that. Edward Bernays was the start of the advertising industry in the United States. He was the most prominent advertiser on Madison Avenue. He also was a nephew of Sigmund Freud. How many of you have heard about Sigmund Freud? See your hand. All right, all of you. Now, what he got from Freud was that his uncle Sigmund was that humans operate at three different levels. There is the superego. There is the angelic world, angels of our better nature. And if you want to sell things, you don't sell it to that. Then there is the rational person. That's the little thing that sits on your shoulder and weighs consequences and does cost-benefit analysis. And then there's the id. That's where the 7 deadly sins reside. That's our fears, our lusts, our hatreds, our violence, and all of that. So Bernays knew from Uncle Sigmund that if you want to sell things, you appeal to the id. You don't appeal to the superego. You don't appeal to the rational mind. You appeal to the id. And then he said some things that were kind of interesting. He said that in a democracy, you had to engineer consent. You had to control what people thought. And so advertising was about controlling what people thought. And if you didn't do that, you ended up with revolution. And revolution, of course, would sweep away, capitalism or whatever, but revolution was what he was aiming to stop. Now, this is Bernays. Not an he's long since dead, but this is an advertisement for a big truck. And now the idea that you can make the ground whimper, if you can see all this, if you can make the ground whimper, how would Patch Adams describe your problem? You didn't like your mama? You didn't like your dad? But if you got to make the ground whimper, what was your problem, if that's your solution? This is one of my favorite advertisements. If you can't see this says, when the asteroid hits, presumably this thing, when the asteroid hits, you'll be ready. This is the back end of a Hummer. And all of you know what a Hummer is, big monster car patterned on military vehicles, and they sell in the United States and China. Well, it gets about 6 feet per gallon of petrol. What are you ready to do? You can't do anything. But this is Bernays. There's no super ego argument. There's no rational argument. It's an appeal, in this case, to fear and to power. This is Dolce & Gabbana. How many of you shop at Dolce & Gabbana? Let me see hands. We've got a couple. I didn't know what they were, and I was trying to understand what this advertisement was selling. And in the States, we have what we call free-range chickens, and so I just assumed that these were women in sustainable agriculture. They've got a goat and a chicken here, so I thought they were kind of 3 free-range chicks. Bernays. And Bernays is appealing once again to the id. Don't have to say what Dolce & Gabbana sells, you just sell an image, and the image works down at the level of the id. How many of you recognize that curve? Let me see your hands. How many of you drink the stuff? Well, a couple of you do. How many recognize that curve? To our embarrassment again. How about that one? Now, this is the kicker. How many recognize this curve? Anybody? Now, one of these can kill you. And somebody, when I said that once to an earlier audience, somebody said, no. All 4 can kill you. You can die from Coca-Cola, sugar, and caffeine. You can die from eating McDonald's hamburgers, and you can probably die in a road accident wearing Nike gear. This is the Keeling curve. And this is the breathing in and out of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And in a Bernaysian world, you wouldn't hear about this. There's nothing to be sold. As a matter of fact, if you understand the Keeling curve, you don't buy as much. This is global warming. This is the heart of the issue. The curve was named for David Keeling, who went to Mauna Loa back in 1958, and he began to chart carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And when he went there, the CO2 levels in the atmosphere were about 328 parts per million. We've crossed 400 parts per million. And now we have a pretty good record. If you extended this curve back in time, you could take it back 640,000 years, and maybe if you weaken the standards for evidence a little bit, you could take it back maybe 1.5 million or 2 million years. If you weaken a little bit more, you can take it back 14 million years. We are where humans have never been before. But we know the McDonald's curve, we know the Coca-Cola and the Nike swoosh, we know these things. But the one thing that would destroy us as a civilization is the Keeling curve. It is the record of what we burn every day. What comes out of our smokestacks, what comes out of our tailpipes, that's carbon, and that's changing the climate very rapidly. This is a chart from a psychologist by the name of Abraham Maslow. And he was famous in educational circles for describing self-actualization, the process by which we grow up and mature. So down here, there's infantile self-gratification. This is every kid, and every kid, basically, small children want to satisfy their wants for mother and milk and so forth, and it gets up a little more. If they pass muster, they get up to self-mastery. They learn how to do things and make things and so forth. And if they do well enough, they acquire self-esteem that I am a person that's valuable and in my own right. And then self-actualization was for saints. This is Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King and people who acquired a sense of themselves that transcended human needs. And then this just is a transcendent stage. Now, Maslow wanted to keep us down here in the state of infantile self-gratification. That was the whole point of Maslow's work. And he, by and large, succeeded. Now, the point of all this is that you and I, as teachers, now deal with young people who have been shaped by the likes of Edward Bernays. And the point of a consumer society is to keep people at that state of infantile self-gratification. They're the ones that make good consumers. They're the ones that watch television. They're the ones that keep the economy, the commercial economy, going. And the net result is this. I don't want to dwell on this slide, but we live in an age of paradox, incredible paradox. And so we've got more knowledge now than ever, but our purposes have shrunk. We control nature in ways that are awesome. We penetrated into the atom and into the DNA, the life force in the human cell. And we control nature in all kinds of ways, but the strange paradox is the sustainability of the earth has gone way down. And we now live in a world of surprises. It's a black swan kind of world in which these surprises begin to affect us all. Wealth has gone way up, but so has poverty, and happiness has gone down. Military spending in the United States and elsewhere around the world has gone up, but our security has gone down. And then finally, we now a million ways to communicate with smartphones and Twitter and Facebook and so forth. I don't use Twitter, I just quiver from time to time, but that's a bad joke and it may not translate. But the content of our communication has gone way down. We live in an age of paradox. And so you as teachers are at the fulcrum point where this paradox intersects the lives of real kids as they go from ages 6 to 22 and on beyond. Now, the next part of the talk is going to be autobiographical. I started out, my father was a college president, and I spent the first roughly 26 or 7 years, or actually longer than that, about 30 years, in around higher education. And I began to realize this wasn't really working, because as Satish puts it, the head was over here, and that was all intellect, and that was divided into two halves. There was a male and a female side, and those were separate. And the male side, the analytical part of the brain, was one thing. That was what was prized. The female part of the brain was about humor and intuition and poetry and so forth, and that was not so prized. And then the hands were irrelevant because you didn't have to make anything, and then the heart was left out altogether. And so I was teaching at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and I thought, this really isn't working. And upstairs were the historians, and downstairs were the economists, and no one ever talked to each other. You'd ride in an elevator up to your department, and you got tenure based in one department and without any thought given to another department. And I began to read in the early 1970s. I read E.F. Schumacher's Small is Beautiful when the book came out, and Limits to Growth, and dozens of other books that are still worth reading. And began to think, this isn't the way education ought to be. So I thought, well, let's start a different educational place. And so we looked around the United States, and for reasons that I don't fully understand, we selected a place right here. This is Fox, Arkansas, and it's located in the Arkansas Ozarks. This is an ancient plateau. This is probably some of the oldest rocks in the United States. Ancient hills that used to be 10 or 15,000 feet high. Now they're down to maybe 2,000 or 3,000 feet. And so this is what it looked like. We bought a valley from ridgetop to ridgetop, 3 miles along a stream called Meadow Creek. This is the middle part of it, and this is the southern part of it. And we said, we're going to make a new school here, and the rule is that we're going to draw a line around all this. So all of our land, we drew a big circle around it. We said, if it happens inside that circle, it's curriculum. And so the way we managed 1,300 acres of forest, the way we developed a farm, the way we built, the way we developed our own economy, that became the thing that we studied. And so we had a sawmill. We built an actual sawmill and sawed trees up into timbers. This is one of the first buildings we built. This is a conference center. This is 23 feet into the ground at this end. This is what it looks like a little more broadly. This is an auditorium in the conference center. And so we began to have meetings of anybody that wanted to talk about sustainability across the United States. Bill Clinton was then governor of Arkansas, and we organized with Bill Clinton the first conference ever held on climate change and banking. And the point was that if a banker lends money that is for projects that were inefficient buildings and gas-guzzling cars, there is a statistically important chance that they will end up in his bad loan portfolio. He'll lose money. And so we held events on sustainability with all kinds of groups, and it became a place we said, if you want to hold this at the local, Hilton Hotel, it doesn't fit here. So this was a barn. We had the largest barn in the county. This is the south side of the conference center. Solar collectors and so forth. The building was powered by sunlight. Offices up here. The building steps into this hillside in 5 half-floor jumps. This is from the ridge looking down. Those pictures were taken over here looking back this way. This is a dorm here. This is a dorm here. We had a commercial restaurant. We could house groups up to about 85, and everybody that came in had to learn to do something with their hands. We brought in speakers from all over the United States and some from Europe. Wendell Berry, the great American writer, Wes Jackson, the agronomist. We brought in educators, teachers. We brought in students from the old Soviet Union before the Iron Curtain collapsed. But the idea was if you came there, you had to learn how to make or do something with your hands. You had to engage in activity with each other. Cutting firewood, you had to do something physical. As well as metal. And so people would come in and speakers would come in from all over the United States, and it was, we always had something coming and going. There was always one group leaving and another group arriving. We operated a farm. We mostly raised cattle organically. This was a part of the tillable land. This is Bill Clinton way back when he still had brown hair. And this was at an event probably about 1986. These are the things that we did. Very much like Satish is organized at Schumacher College, but we held conferences, workshops. We had all kinds of people coming through. And so workshops, internships, elder hostels. We did one for Walmart that started the Walmart environmental buying effort. And then our focus was on these areas here. But again, if it happened within our borders, it was curriculum. Now, the idea is an old idea. It has European roots. Maria Montessori said much of the same thing. In the United States, John Dewey said the same thing. Make the school a laboratory and join head, hands, heart in those places. These were some of the highlights. I won't go into these, but we did a whole variety of events. But again, every event had to be different. It wasn't just a place where education happened. It was a place where we wanted to touch every part of the human being. So in the evening, we would have square dances and folk dances, and music was part of it. We had a commercial restaurant, and so we served a lot of the food that we actually grew on site. And so the place became a laboratory for what later I called ecological literacy. The philosophy here is old, and you'll recognize Maria Montessori and John Dewey, Aldo Leopold in the United States, but the idea was to break out of those pigeonholes and begin to see the school as a place of connection, connecting people to land, to their own skills, and connecting head and different parts of the head and the hands and the heart. The conclusion of it for me was this, and this is a kind of a theoretical statement. The problem with education can be seen as a problem in education or of education. And I came to see education as a problem, the problem we face is one of the way we've gone about it. It's a crisis of education. So this disorder we see in the outside world, in fact, begins in how we think about the role in the outside world. And that makes it important for all of us who are educators. This is a crisis first and foremost about education. It's not first and foremost about economics or politics or technology or any of those things. It's how we think and how poorly we think. And then came to the conclusion after 11 years in this place that all education, everything that we do, is environmental education. We teach young people they're part of or a part from the natural world. So coming out of that, there were two books. This is the book Ecological Literacy. It came out 22 years ago. This is Earth and Mind. It came out in 1994 in a reissued version in 2010. But those were the essays that came out of the experience that we had in Meadow Creek. Elaine and I left Meadow Creek after 11 years. We started it and then moved on to Oberlin College in Ohio, where I am now. And Oberlin College takes a little bit of explaining. I'll show you where it is in just a moment. But the college is the first college to have accepted women in the United States and African Americans, and that was back in 1833. So we were the college that was the town that was said later that we're the town that started the U.S. Civil War over slavery. We have a great science program, a very famous conservatory of music, environmental studies program, and a great art museum ranked number 3 in American colleges and universities and so forth. The second part of the story, though, is this. At Meadow Creek, what we want to do is draw a circle around 1,500 acres, roughly, what is that, 1,000 hectares, so forth. But draw a circle around that land and see if it happens inside that is curriculum. So how we farmed, how we built, how we managed forests, that was all part of the curriculum. And we wanted students to begin to see how those things linked up. So we went to Oberlin. The first challenge we faced was how to build by the same philosophy. Can you build in a way that the building itself is a system? And so in 1995, we began to organize the early phase of the U.S., what later we called the U.S. Green Building Movement. And this was the Adam Joseph Lewis Center. The way this building occurred was we got permission to build a building. I had to raise the money for it, but the building came out of a series of 13 design, what are called charrettes, or planning sessions. And we said to students, if you want to be part of this process, come in. And so we had about 250 students join the effort, along with architects and engineers and people from NASA. We had about 25 different architectural firms and engineering firms, and some of the friends of Satish and mine were involved. Amory Levins and people like that were involved in the building and the thinking of this. And so the students got together. Students had never designed a classroom building before on our campus. So the first question was, what kind of building do you want? And this is where applied love, where rubber meets road, as they say. And so the first thing that came back was, well, we want the building powered entirely by sunshine. Now, we're not like Mallorca. We have maybe 2 sunny days a year, and so how do you power the building by sunshine? Well, they wanted the building powered by sunshine. And then they wanted the building to be zero discharge. So that meant drinking water comes in here, and drinking water goes out here. And the building has to purify its own water. And the young people that we, in the States, it may be different numbers here, but on average, they have about 220 or 230 organochlorine compounds in their fatty tissues and bloodstream. That's from what they eat, what they drink, the air, the water around them, and so forth. So they arrive pre-polluted. And so the students want to take all the chemicals out of the building. So how do you build an educational building that has no petrochemicals or no toxic ingredients in the making of the building? So they had a long list of things that they wanted. And basically, it's the list that is now the standard for the U.S. Green Building Council. So this is the building. This is a wastewater treatment system. It looks like, you'll see one more slide of it in just a moment, but it treats all the wastewater out of the building. It's essentially an indoor wetland. This is an indoor shot. This was built, it opened nearly 15 years ago. This is triple pane glazing. The heating and cooling goes through the slab and the floor. This is one photovoltaic array. This is the second. These power the building. We generate more power than we use. And so the building is powered by sunshine, even a relatively cloudy part of the United States. We're actually a little bit more sunny than Germany on average. So the building is powered. We send our power back on the grid. We don't have the advanced policies that Germans have for feed-in tariffs. But this is south, this is north, this is east, this is west. This area is a restored wetland that is a model or a replica of the landscape that had been on this site prior to European settlement. And this is a plaza that deflects sunlight into the building in the wintertime. The back of the building this is an orchard. All of that is maintained by students. And this is the back looking toward this. And so when the students began to think about what would happen in this space, they thought this wouldn't be just a place where education happens. This would be a place, by the way it was designed and built and maintained and evolved over time, that became itself educational. And so this drove our curriculum and the kind of courses that we teach in very different directions. Students want to know, how do you deal with the problem of climate change? But climate change is big, it's a global problem. Too big to get your head around. But one building, one classroom building, you can make that carbon neutral. You can make that an asset in this fight to balance the climate. I don't know how you deal with food and so forth, but to teach people how to garden and how to raise food on site as part of the standard curriculum. So early on, they learn soils and fertility and plants and insects and how to raise food without chemicals. In water purification, water will, in short order, emerge as the largest human crisis that we face. It'll be the most immediate part of climate change. So how do you purify wastewater? Well, one way to do this is to do the way nature does it. So the living machine, which, this is an auditorium, by the way, this is the living machine. So you flush the toilet or the Louvre, and the water comes in here. These tanks are 7 feet into the ground, and there are little rafts that hold the plants here. And what we do is what a wetland does. You're maximizing the exposure of the root surface to the water column. And the plant roots take out phosphorus and nitrogen, so they turn human waste into plant tissue. And it works just fine. This has worked beautifully without a flaw for nearly 14 years now. Not had a problem with it. And so they wanted a building, zero discharge, drinking water in, drinking water out. And they began to think about this. With a building like this, the building sits here, and upstream from that building are wells and mines and forests and manufacturing establishments. And the rule for this building was, if you compromise human dignity or ecological functions upstream, you can't say that that building is a good building. And the same is true downstream. If you release lots of carbon in the making or operation of the building, and so you're changing climate because of the building, or toxifying the earth, or acidifying oceans, you can't say that that building is a good building. And we educate in all kinds of ways. So you can teach ecology in buildings that use lots of energy and have lots of toxic materials around and so forth that are part of the problem. And young people at very early ages learn, I'm not sure how you translate hypocrisy, but they learn hypocrisy early on. That it's fine to emote and talk about certain things, but you can't do certain things. This is applied love. This is understanding how love spills from one generation to the next and spills across boundaries to other species. The building is a net energy exporter, so we're sending lots of power back on the grid here. This is one of the large PV arrays at the building. So this in the States is still, I believe I'm correct in saying this, the only entirely solar-powered and zero-discharge building in the United States. These are the two books I wrote coming out of this. This was a book on design. This is the history of the making of the Lewis Center. Now, if we just stop here with a little building, we would have done nothing. And so at our time, with time being very short, for us to turn these trends around, I'll say something at the very end about that. We have to take these things to scale. And so the next step was to take our little town. This is an aerial photograph of Oberlin, Ohio, little town that's located in the U.S. Rust Belt, founded in 1832, small town. It's part of the Rust Belt, so our poverty level is high. 28% of the people that live in Oberlin are at or below the poverty line. And this is where we are. Detroit is up here. Oberlin is here, Cleveland is right here, Toledo is here. So this is Lake Erie. So we're 14 miles from the Lake Erie shore. The downtown is a very typical, small, middle American town. It looks cute and quaint, but if you're a merchant and you're not selling beer or coffee or pizza, you're not going to make much money. So the Oberlin Project was conceived in the belief that we needed to look at what we do in the world as a system. And so we've typically dealt with education here. That's one little box. And we've got another little box here we call agriculture, and that's fine, and economics and urban renewal and green building. But those things don't necessarily help to reinforce each other. So the theory behind the Oberlin Project was that we would do this as a system. And so we set up several goals. One was to redevelop the downtown, but do it in a way that was carbon neutral. Second is to make the city and the college, in fact, carbon neutral. So we're the smallest of the C40 cities created by former President Clinton. We're not even a good block in Beijing, but we're in the group of C40 cities. We wanted to get local foods up to not just a few school gardens, but up to 70% of the food that was consumed locally was grown locally in a green belt around the city. We want to do this the way we did the Lewis Center. So in the remaking of this little town, we wanted this to be part of the education that young people would experience. And so we've engaged, the goal is to engage 1,000 students from grade school up through college in the remaking of this city. And then we want to replicate this, and that's the last thing I'll say in just a moment. So how do you organize a community? This is a replication of how we began to do this. We set up community committees. We began to have lots of meetings. So we have an agricultural committee, we have an education committee, we have an economic development committee. So we began to engage people in the process. Now, what this means is that the community becomes part of its own school. So we think of a classroom. There's a blackboard here and chairs and so forth out here, but now the schoolroom for us is the whole community, the surrounding region. So if I put a compass down on our town square and I draw a circle, let's say 5 miles radius, that's our classroom. That's what we want to begin to educate. So the idea is to begin to get sustainability, this applied love out into the community. What do you do once you love? You've got to change the economy. You've got to change how we build. It begins with how do you think. You've got to begin to provide employment for people who are by and large poor and don't really care about sustainability. These are the 4 major goals, and I'll skip over this, but these are the things we're trying to do. And for us, beginning to change the way people earn their keep. And so the industrial economy says, we'll make it for you. We're saying in this economy, we can do it ourselves. And reorient the economy to things that are sustainable and involving food and craft work and energy and shelter and so forth. This is taken from an article, and don't bother reading this. This is taken from an article that was written by one of the great American thinkers about systems. Her name was Donella Meadows. And Donella Meadows was one of the authors of the famous book, The Limits to Growth, and then 15 or so other books as well. And in this, she was asking a question that we should be asking students. If you want to change a system, how do you change a system? And so she started in inverse proportion. She said, these are the least effective things you do. These are the most effective things that you do. And now, this was not given to the community as scriptural, but we passed out about 250 copies around the community. We had several large meetings. How do you change this system called Oberlin? And the things up here are things that we argue about. They can slow the damage, but they don't solve the problem. Things down here have to do with changing the structure of the system, and that's more important. We can change the coefficients, the rate at which things get worse, but to change the structure begins to change what the coefficients represent. But down here, this is the major thing. And so you've heard in different ways Gilliam and Satish and Patch talk about changing consciousness, because that's where the change really begins. Once we change worldviews, then you can change the system. But the problem is, how do you change worldviews? That is very difficult to do, because it is threatening to some people. It means changing how you do this, but this is where applied love becomes so critically important. People will not change if they're threatened. It has to be. The only people that will change, and Patch said this last night, is if they believe that you, the message of change, in fact, care about them, and you have that bond, that string that was here, that connects them. I may disagree, but I know you care for me, and that becomes one of the important things in changing worldviews. So in our town, sustainability means lots of different things to lots of different people. This is what we want it to mean in Oberlin. This is one of the great art museums in American higher education. This is ranked right behind the museums of art at Harvard University and Yale University. This is a performing arts center that we have plays and operas and all kinds of events there that are very, very good. And then this is a hotel. It may have been the worst hotel ever built. It was built in 1955 as an interstate motor inn, but this sits right beside those others. So we have a block of buildings with a great art museum, performing arts center, and then this thing. And we needed to drive the economy, so we decided to tear it down. And so this is the building several weeks ago beginning to come down. This was what it looked like last week. And in its place, we are building what will be the first entirely solar-powered hotel, conference center, and commercial complex, I think, in the world. This is what it will look like on completion. This part is a conference center, office space, commercial space, hotel space here. But this will be powered entirely by sunshine. Now, this isn't an argument to build hotels, but it is a statement that if you want to change things in the economy, we needed something to drive a sustainable economy. We need something that bought things and a place for people to stay. We need a restaurant that buys local foods, and the goal here is to have a 4-star, very good restaurant that purchases food from the local farmers. Another view of the same building, a street-level view. This building will have a number of firsts. It'll be the first commercial building in the United States to eliminate man-made refrigerants in the heating and cooling system. And that's important because man-made refrigerants have the same greenhouse carbon effect that the entire U.S. auto fleet does. That's roughly 320 million cars. The building will be hyper-efficient, so we'll use a fraction of the energy cost of a typical building of the same size. These are the components of that block. But what we want is a block where we have a party. So sustainability is often, you got to do this, and the finger starts wagging. You got to change this. You got to make this happen. But we want to do something very different here. This is about something that is radically different. This is radical love. This is beginning to build the economic infrastructure for a very different kind of experience, but one that says, come on in and enjoy art and music and performance and have a great meal. And the meal is grown locally and it's sustainable, it's organic agriculture. And oh, by the way, the energy comes from the sunshine. So we want to begin to have a party, but a solar-powered party. This is across the street, a new development. This is a $17 million project, condominiums up here, commercial space down here. This is LEED Gold. I'm particularly proud of this because this was done by 3 former students at Oberlin. And they went out and they raised money. They had no money themselves. They spent about 8 years making this happen. And it finally happened. What it began to do was to demonstrate smart growth in a town. So for me, I was thinking, gee, students, it would take them a long time to become productive in the world. But in fact, these 3 left college and started a major project immediately right out of college, and they pulled it off, and it's a great building. This is a 11-acre solar field just north of the campus. This is a 3.2 megawatt output array. By comparison, what's called our base load power, the 24/7 power, 24 hours per day, is about 11 megawatts. This is kind of a summary of what we've done. Everything here in black has been completed. What is red is yet to do. This will be completed next year. This will be finished probably 5 years out. These things are all still in process. So these are the things we've done to date. We've spent, if you're a banker, we've spent or invested about $106 million in a community with a poverty rate of 28%. And students have been there for every part of this. And one of the exciting things for me is to see students come back or hear when they come back. To say that, yeah, I was part of that back in 1998 or the year 2005, and I was part of that change. And they realize very quickly they can change the world. Applied love with a lot of competence, in this case economic competence, architectural competence, and vision, can change the world. If I take a band of light and I put it through a prism, it breaks into different bandwidths. And so what is the Oberlin project? Well, it's lots of different things. At the very top here, if I am a student in the town, it's just a really cool downtown. It's a town with life and liveliness and food and music and entertainment. If I'm part of a design team, it's the first experience our integrated design team, architects, engineers, urban planners, economists, and so forth, have ever been involved in, that is a systems level project. How do you do things where 1 + 1 is not 2, but it's 11, as Satish puts it, or 2 + 2 is 22, as I've been putting it. So how do you change the world? It is and we're visual creatures. 70% of our sensory apparatus is in our eyes. We believe what we see. And sometimes the reverse is also true. But how do we make change visible? How do we change worldviews? How do we get down here to the bottom of that earlier slide of Donella Meadows and begin to see how change can occur by the way we make schools and how those schools impact their local community? If we stopped at Oberlin, we wouldn't have done very much. We'd have a little city of roughly 10,000 people living sustainably and so forth, but the world is bigger than Oberlin. So we set out to create a larger network. And we're calling this the Lake Erie Crescent. This is Lake Erie here. This is Flint, Michigan here, Detroit, Toledo, Oberlin, Cleveland, Youngstown. This is the heart of the old U.S. economy. This was the heart of the Rust Belt. Made automobiles and steel, and that was that old economy. And it's largely collapsed. And so the idea is to begin to rethink, based on what we were doing in Oberlin, rethink the economy of the whole region. And so the theory is roughly this. We want to do what's called import substitution. So if you make it, service it, grow it, or process it, buy it locally. Don't buy from China, don't buy from California, but keep the buying power within the region. It's not a new idea. This was, if you know urban theory, the name Jane Jacobs would come up very quickly. It's called simply import substitution. And so the idea is to get universities and colleges and restaurants and so forth to begin to shift their buying power toward urban development, renewable energy, and local agriculture. 3 things. In the belief that these are the places where 1 + 1 can be 11, or 2 + 2, 22, where there are what are called synergies. There are feedback loops, and you begin to change. Just a little change here and a big effect over here. So this is a theory. So we're putting together universities. These are the first 4 that we've got lined up. Eventually, we're going to add hospitals to this and get the buying power. Now, the beauty of this is this. All of you know, the United States is in trouble in lots of ways. Congress won't pass anything. Nobody likes President Obama, and so we're stuck. How do we make that change? And our theory is very simple. Let's start at the bottom. We'll have to do it anyway. So let's not wait for government to get right and people to come around. But applied love means you've got to go into this arena. Applied love means you can't be content to let the world go the way it's going. So the idea is to begin to harness the buying power at the bottom of this system and shift it very gradually into these 3 areas, but in ways that reduce carbon emissions, develop a local economy, improve health, clean air, make people happier and so forth, but make it clean and green and safe and prosperous. Nothing new here. This is Jane Jacobs, and the idea of using buying and investing power of higher education and all of this import substitution. And the theory is that we can do better working together. Detroit can't solve its problems just in Detroit. And no city can solve its own problems just within its own boundaries. So the idea is to spread this out and begin to develop a regional complex. Let me go to finally some reflections about some other kinds of things. Your students and mine are going to live in a radically different world. Die is already cast. We've already committed to a future that is much hotter, more capricious, lots more surprises. These are simply numbers. So that is temperature number. These are temperature. This is carbon dioxide. You could use methane. They all kind of go along like this. So we know that when carbon goes up, temperature goes up. This little lag is largely attributed now to the fact that oceans store heat. And so we're living with what has been called a climate time bomb, and it will go off. And so as oceans warm, the temperature will begin to rise dramatically. And so we are headed for somewhere between a 2 and 4 degrees centigrade warming. The Royal Academy of Sciences in London said that we would hit possibly 4 degrees by the year 2060, thereabouts. But what we know is that climate change is happening faster, it's more pervasive, it's a lot more surprises than we had thought about. So your students and mine go into a radically different world. I wish I could say that the U.S. had cut carbon emissions radically. We haven't done that, although we are cutting carbon emissions, and a lot of that's going on below the proverbial radar screen. But this is a radically different world. Now, here's part of the problem with this. I hope this translates okay. If I came out here with an Uzi, and I casually aimed it at you, I'd have your attention better than I have it on that screen. Does that translate? Do you follow what I'm saying? The problem is we evolved as creatures of eyesight, and so if there was some threat to our well-being, if a giant bear came in here, your adrenal system, your fight-flight mechanism would kick in. You'd be out those doors quickly, or you'd be banding together to fight the bear. But this is merely a chart. And so we look at that, it's kind of pretty, there's blue, there's kind of red, and so forth. It doesn't impact us, but this can kill us. This is that 4th curve. This is the result of the Keeling curve, going up like this. So there are some jags here, but this goes back 160,000 years. This is the instant in which we live. And we're driving carbon up so fast and temperature so fast that we're creating a different planet. The climate activist Bill McKibben in the States calls this Earth, E-A-A-R-T-H. It's a different world. It's a world where reports showed several days ago that half of the animals on the planet in 1970 are gone. maybe half the species will be gone by the end of this century. And so how do we prepare young people for this? Now, the other part of the problem is this. If you can read that, the point of this is that the carbon we put in the atmosphere tends to stay there a long time. And so from what comes out of tailpipes in our cars or our smokestacks will be there 1,000 or 10,000 years in the future. And you think, what do we know that has a longevity of 1,000 or 10,000 years? I said last night that you think of Chinese Empire maybe, or maybe it's the Catholic Church, but not many human institutions can stay in business that long. But we've now created a world where we need radical love, and we need it quick. But it's a love based on what we can understand about science. And the fact is, we've now prepared a time bomb for the children you and I talk or teach. We say we love them, but we've prepared the means for their destruction. And it's simply the remorseless working out of big numbers. Now, that can paralyze. And the difficulty is, I was saying last night, caught between optimism, which says there's not a problem, we'll figure it out, there's some technology that will figure out how to get carbon out of the atmosphere that's also carbon neutral, can do it in time at a scale necessary to change the actual, and is technically feasible. And over here is despair, and we know that despair, just giving up, is a sin. So we can't do that. And the middle ground is hope. That's that hope, but hope is a verb. It means you have to act with its sleeves rolled up. It requires that we do something. And as us as educators, we now have to equip young people for a world that humans have never seen before. We evolved 200 and some thousand years ago as an identifiable species. This problem threatens all of that. We evolved in what was called the Holocene, that kind of interlude right in here, well, the previous slide, that little tiny roughly 10 or 12,000 interlude right here. That is everything that we knew. That's our poetry, our art, our culture, our religion, our architecture, our highs, our lows. But now we're in what is called the Anthropocene. And what do we know? What does love mean in the Anthropocene? And how do we do applied love, not theoretical love, but applied love that spills out over generations? Because that's what we've now done. Another thought. One way I think you don't prepare kids for this different world is with only electronics. I think they radically need, and radical love begins in a radical affection for the natural world. It begins in forests and by rivers and seas. It begins in farms and gardens, but it's a radical love affair with the way the world works. I don't think it's like that. But more and more what I see and what all of us see are people looking at some electronic device. Einstein had some thoughts about that. He thought that our total dependence on electronics would at some point create a generation of idiots. And he didn't know the half of it. There's another little issue. As you think about sustainability, there are, and for our students, there are 3 ways we can destroy the human future. One of those is to blow up the planet, and that threat hasn't gone away. That still exists. We still have a world of 10,000 or 12,000 nuclear weapons, and we don't know where all of them are. We have a second way to do this, climate change and environmental destruction. We can simply wreck the environment of Earth by heating it up and by destroying, by acidifying oceans. We can wreck Earth. That's a second way. But there's a third way. We can create devices that are smarter than we are, and at some point would find us, Homo sapiens, inconvenient. Does that translate? Are you all with me? So the people that work in this field of artificial intelligence, this is technology without conscience, technology run amok, technology with no debate about what kind of prosthetic devices do we want. Technology does shape us in all kinds of ways. And so the theory is that we can live with robots and perhaps even merge with them, what's called, what some people call the great merger and so forth, but it's a merger of carbon-based intelligence with silicon-based intelligence. Ray Kurzweil refers to this as the singularity, but it's a point where we, carbon-based intelligence, merge with machines and, silicon-based intelligence. But that's not human. And there's so far been no dialogue, very little debate about whether this would be a good thing or not. So that's kind of our future. Machines smarter than we are, and when they learn to replicate themselves or to breed, have love between themselves or whatever, they'll find us inconvenient. One of the founders of this field, Norbert Wiener, Patch referred to him last night, one of the great mathematicians and one of the founders of the whole cybernetics computer field, said that when this happens, we have no good reason to believe that they'll be kindly or well-disposed to us. That's the world we're creating, and hardly any debate about it. And so the number of robots are going up like this, their capabilities are going up like this, and we sit here without a murmur. Three ways. All of them require radical, maybe dislove. To turn this around would require radical love, but that requires foresight, the capacity to see what we don't necessarily want to see, but it's there, it's real. It will require courage. So what's that mean for educators? We have to educate students for courage and for foresight and for radical love. But radical love will drive all of that. A couple of last thoughts. This is our grandson, age about 4. Richard Louv, great writer, wrote a book called The Last Child in the Woods, and another one called Nature Principles. How many are familiar with Richard Louv's work? Let me see your hands. Anybody? Okay, a few of you are. The point is, kids now spend more and more time indoors, not outdoors, and so attendance at national parks is way down, and they find a computer screen much more agreeable than learning to garden or whatever. And the issue that raises, in one way, is this one. E.O. Wilson, the great biologist, puts it, can we snap the psychic thread that connected us to nature for all of our evolution? And remember, the intelligence that we represent and the intelligence you're trying to hone as teachers would not have occurred on the moon. It was a dialogue between a species, Homo sapiens, and the natural world. That natural world of sights and animals and sounds and so forth. That was the incubator, the birthplace of human intelligence. Human intelligence would not have happened in a moonscape. It couldn't have happened on Mars, but it could happen here with a planet with a biosphere. And so if we snap that thread, and if we destroy the planet or simply move away from nature, would we be human? And what would we have lost? And the problem in one way is this. The world we're creating is going to be very capricious. It's going to be hotter, drier, bigger storms. And over here, there is virtual reality. So as we come out of this period of the Holocene, that's the world we're setting in motion. Unless we act now, that's radical hope. And that's radical action. And that's applied love. And over here, virtual reality, it's going to be so easy for people to sit at a screen and live with virtual reality, but it will be sold to them as a product, as a commodity. By people with no such love, they will be sold as commercial products. And then one final kind of extraneous thought. A lot of this is driven by an economy. So when you think of young people and think of the driver in all of this, what do we teach them about real economy? And the difficulty here is the top item. The laws of economics start with Adam Smith, 1776, or said to start with Adam Smith in 1776. But the laws of the way the planet works as a physical system are 3.8 billion years old. So we have this mismatch. How do you build an economy that works within the laws of the biosphere? How do you build an economy that accommodates the laws of entropy and thermodynamics? How do you build an economy that doesn't destroy nature? And as I said last night, there really aren't many accidents. So all the disorder out there starts here, but it's expressed through this thing we call an economy. And we have this fetish, the economy has to get bigger and bigger. When is it big enough? When do we have enough? When do we begin to share? And so we have to begin to rethink an economy, and I think the rethinking process starts in classrooms at a very early stage. It just means young kids learning to share their cookies early on and clean up their messes. Now, conclusion is this. We've bought a a very different world. There's no one in this room that has grounds to believe that if you run the film, if this were a movie and you run the film fast forward 20, 30, 50, 100 years, that we've got a happy future ahead. This is the world our students will live in. Unless we act quickly. Unless we act, that idea of love is a great idea. But if it stays a theory, if it doesn't begin to intersect the way we make an economy and the way we make buildings and the way we shape civilization, it'll amount to nothing. Just so much hot air. Striving after wind, in the word of Ecclesiastes. We have to begin to reshape that world. If we do, there is a short window, a narrow window, that we can make a world that is still wonderful. Mallorca can be still a wonderful place with gardens and greenery and so forth. It won't be the place you knew 30 years ago. But 100 years out, it can still be a habitable, wonderful place. And it can be the place where a lot of educational theories and change began to happen. Change can happen here. But this is a world of local gardens and small schools. It's a world of passion and love and caring and more poetry and so forth, and probably fewer shopping malls, fewer cruise ships in the harbor, a lot more self-reliance, a lot more adequate people, and people living better lives. This is a time, it seems to me, to tell different stories and to create a very different narrative. If the idea of radical love is to amount to anything, it has to change the narrative. It has to change the stories we tell about ourselves and the stories we tell to ourselves. We've got to change very quickly. We have all the tools, all the assets. We don't need a massive research and development program for new energy sources. We don't need to do a lot of that. It's simply to apply what we already know. But we can change that narrative. One final slide is this. The Great Work is a title of a book by one of my heroes, Thomas Berry. Not Wendell Berry, but Thomas Berry. They're both heroes. Thomas Berry was a monk and a religious historian. And his book called The Great Work describes any given generation has a great job to do. And it's never pleasant. It's always difficult. In the U.S. case, the great work of young men and women in the 1860s, nearly a century, almost 2 centuries ago, was to free slaves. And the great work in Europe was to rid the continent of tyranny, of fascism and communism. And the great work of our time is to begin to come to grips with carbon emissions very, very quickly. Is to equip a generation of young people, your students and my students, who understand the reality, who know what the score is, and roll up their sleeves and get down to work to change it. It's a world where peace has got to be more than a theory. It's got to be the reality. Where war becomes a distant memory. We don't really recall what it is. It's a world where we can reshape the human place on earth. It's a world of radical love, and that radical love spills out over generations. It cannot be confined to this generation. It can't be confined only to humans. That's a world worth fighting for, and that's a world that we're going to create. And I believe the change happens first in education. It changes how we think about the world, how we think about ourselves, and our place in the world, and our place in this long evolutionary scheme with roots way back, hundreds of thousands of years ago, all the way out into a future we can barely imagine. But that's the future we must imagine. Thank you for working on this great work. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Great, thank you. Great, thanks, thank you. Thank you, dear friend.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Glenn, thank you.